Hello everyone!
Today we are speaking about
The Queen of the Mystery Stories.
We're talking about Agatha Christie.
She was born on the 15th of September 1980 and she died on the 12th of January 1976.
She was married twice.
the first time was in 1940 to Colonel Archibald Christie, a British businessman and a military officer. Then they got divorced in 1928. In 1930, Agatha was married to an archaeologist called Sir Max Egger.
She had only one daughter called Rosalind Hawks from her first husband.
She was mainly homeschooled. Factors that led her to be inspired are many, but the first one is that she traveled a lot with her two husbands.
And served in hospitals and pharmacies in the World War II.
Many life experiences that she could turn some of them to real great stories.
Although she wrote more than 100 books, her most successful one is The Murder on the Orient Express.
Such as The Murder of the Orient Express, Mousetrap, and The Mystery of the Blue Train. And she wrote the longest play, Mousetrap.
The Mousetrap play by Agatha Christie is the longest-running play. It was first introduced in 1952, and it has been running up till March 2020. Then, the West End Theatre in London had to close due to COVID-19 issues. The play starts with the murder of a woman, with a written note says, "This is the first one and the three blind mice." Had three children, but her husband abused the children, and one of whom died. It was based on a real story. Started to have their guests. The first one was Mr. Christopher Warren, a young man, Mrs. Bully, who complained about everything, Mr. Major McCullough, an ex-military officer, and Miss Casewell, a young mannish woman. And all of that was before arriving a fifth guest who introduced himself as Mr. Barvinci. He told Molly and Gus that his car turned over the snow and all the roads are closed. The next day, a police officer called Molly to tell her that he would send another police officer called Trotter, and they must listen to him carefully and do whatever he wants. The couple was really confused and they didn't know even what happened to have a police officer. A few hours later, Mr. Major found out that telephone not working. Then Mr. Trotter found out the wire has been cut. Then, while Mrs. Violet was listening to the radio, she screamed, and then Molly found her dead on the floor. So Trotter kept asking all of them and investigating, so the couple got suspicious of each other. Even Mr. Giles got suspicious of Mr. Warren, as he thought that he loved his wife. At the end of the day, Trotter shouted at Molly, accusing her that she was his sister, after confessing that he was George, the son of Mrs. Liam. Was the real detective right there, and he exchanged the roles with the real Mr. Major. So George meant the three blind mice were Mrs. Liam and Mrs. Boyley and his sister. He killed Mrs. Boyley because she was the judge that led him to live with Mrs. Lynn and her husband, and as they abused him when he was a...
And now, with the mystery of the Blue Train. The story starts with Mr. Alden. Mr. Van Alden was an American millionaire. He was searching for a necklace which contains a famous rope known as the Heart of Fire. While he was searching for the necklace, some thugs appeared and attacked him, but he could successfully defend himself, and he continued his searching for the necklace. After that, there was an annoyed man, a man who could speak both English and French fluently, and he was known as Mr. Marie. Mr. Marie was annoyed as the attempt of attacking Mr. Van Alden has failed. After that, Mr. Van Alden has successfully found the necklace and he gave it to his lovely daughter, Mrs. Ruth Kittring. But he made her promise that she won't take the necklace anywhere and that she will leave it at the bank and she won't take it with her to her journey to Riveria. Then they started talking about many issues, but the most important issue was her problems with her husband, Mr. Derek Kittring, Mr. Derek Kittring, that she started talking about her unhappy marriage, that Mr. Derek was in a relationship with a French dancer. Then Mr. Alden decided to try to pay him to agree on divorce, but unfortunately Mr. Derek did not agree. Another part of the story, there was a young woman called Catherine Gray, who she knew that the old woman she took care of became extremely wealthy, so she decided to go to Rivelia and visit her. As a result of this, both characters, who are Ruth Kittring and Catherine Gray, met at the blue train which is going to Rivelia, and they started talking despite they were strangers to each other. Then Ruth started talking to Catherine about why she went to Rivelia, as that she is going to Rivelia to meet an old flame called Comte de la Rouge, and despite however that her father prevented her to do so, and Catherine advised her to call her father despite her pride if necessary. And ever since they did not talk to each other. Later on, when Catherine arrived at Rivelia, she found the policeman asking her about her relationship with Ruth Kittring, as she was murdered, and they asked her to recognize her dead body. Then the policeman recognized also that her jewel case is missed, in addition to the Heart of Fire, and she was in contact with Comte de la Rouge. Then, fortunately, the great investigator, Hamel Peru, was on the train, and he will solve the mystery of the blue train. Then later on, Mr. Van Alden came in with the presence of his secretary, Mr. Major Kington. As time passes, Mr. Poirot finds out many clues that make him closer to solve the mystery. But one of the great things that helped him to solve the mystery was the witness of Ruth's maid Ada Massoon. That she said that while they were on the blue train, Mrs. Ruth finds out a man who she knew on the train, that she was shocked and asked her maid to stay at Red City, but fortunately her maid did not recognize the strange man. At the end of the story, Mr. Poirot finds out the guilty one, the one who killed Mrs. Ruth Kittring. He said that the guilty one here was Mr. Van Alden's secretary, Major Kington, with the help of her maid, Ada Massoon. And at the end of the story, both Catherine Gray and Derek Kittring get married.
Hello everybody, today I'm going to talk about Murder in the Orient Express story. This story talks about Mr. Poirot. He's the main character of the story, and a side information, he's a character in more than 30 stories of Agatha Christie stories. Mr. Poirot is a Belgian detective. He's very famous worldwide. He's one of the best detectives of all time. He's now in Istanbul, and he got a telegram telling him that he needs to go to London as fast as he can. So he went to the Orient Express train, and by luck he finds Mr. Book is one of his best friends and his sidekick in that story. And he first sat in the second class room of the train, and he meets some guy called Mr. Rashad. Mr. Rashad tells him that he needs him to be his guard, but not the meaning of a bodyguard or something. No, he means that there is threatened letters are sent to him, like many of them. I mean, I'm sorry, and he needs him to find out who is doing that. But Mr. Parr refuses because he feels like he's a bad guy. After some time, after exactly like 2 days from Mr. Parr being in the train stops because there were an ice and some problems happened. The train would not move unless some maintenance workers come and do some maintenance to the train. But this was not the worst problem happening in that time, because after some minutes they found out that Mr. Rashid was killed. He was murdered. Mr. Book asks Mr. Parr to work on this crime to find out who is the murderer. In that time, Mr. Parr investigate in that crime. He finds some clues in the murder room, the murder of Mr. Rashad. Many evidence he found, but not even a single clue of them, gave him the real killer or the real murderer, because every clue leads to someone different from the other clue. But after some hours and days, he found out two possible stories that can fit to this murder. First, that the murderer is someone who came into the room of Mr. Rashad and killed him and then ran away. But this one was impossible because there were like many facts that can deny it. They are in the middle of snows, and no one can get out in that time. Then the second story that can fit is that 12 people from the train are murderers. Those 12 people, it was a fact, like it was a true story. 12 people from the train killed Mr. Rashid, but in that time, Mr. Parr knew that his real name is not Rashid but Cassetti, because he invested after that man, and he knew that Mr. Rashid and his real name is Cassetti, and he's actually a murderer too. He killed a daughter of a colonel called Armstrong. And then Mr. Parr found out that every single body from those 12 people is he knew Mr. Armstrong and his daughter. And then they figured out that 12 of them killed him by 12 stabs because of this deed, because he killed Mr. Armstrong's daughter. And by this the story ends. That Mr. Parr didn't tell the police, or didn't tell the police about what happened truly, because he knew that this was like the justice. And this is the end of this story. Thank you.